that said, let's go ahead and begin with the Mobile Suit Gundam review. So just some knowledge drop on here. The original Mobile Suit Gundam is about 40 years old. Came back out. I don't have the information with me right now, but it was back in April of 1979. It was originally canceled, scheduled and slated to be a 52 episode series, condensed down to 43 episodes. US, we only got 42. To be honest, that 43rd can go away. It is a pretty bad filler episode, so glad we got that out of the way. But I did review the original Mobile Suit Gundam series actually a week ago. I'm coming back to it again with all my notes again and refreshing and rehashing myself with all this information so I could see kind of a comparison. So I'm still going to keep my original review up, but I'm going to have this reduxed one and see if a little more clairvoyant of mind here. But for those of you who don't know what the story of Mobile Suit Gundam is, Mobile Suit Gundam is basically taking place in the year Universal Century 0079. The Principality of Xi'an declares its independence from the Earth Federation and initiates a war with them. 9 months have passed with half of the entire population, or human population, decimated by this war. We then follow Amuro Ray and several others as they are dragged into this war unwillingly when Zeon soldiers attack their colony when they find out that they are harboring a secret Federation mobile suit and a new Federation battleship is docking onto their colony. From that point, we follow our little mismatched crew members as they try to survive this war. That being said, here's what I really want to just boil down to what I want to talk about the series overall. Now, animation-wise, a lot of people tend to have some issues with the animation because it's much older. I actually really like the animation a lot. Yes, it's dated. It's got a lot of that old schoolness to it. Like I mentioned, as in Speed Racer or Kimba the Lion, those sort of things. And yes, there has been some animation inconsistencies if you see in certain screenshots or so, such as there's going to be more or less like the Gundams like inflated, or some of the Zaku's look inflated, or like they look disproportionate and things like that. So there's some animation inconsistencies, but throughout, which what I talk about is like less than 5% of what you see on the screen, everything's pretty consistent. The animation looks really, really nice, even for it being dated 40 years old, but it's still good. I have only watched the original Mobile Suit Gundam in English, and that's how I would prefer to watch it. I've not actually watched it in Japanese. And I'll come around when I talk about the movie trilogy, because that was my only option. But, you know, a lot of people, I'm not going to get into the debate about dubs versus subs. I'm not going to get into that debate. Both sides have good arguments. But for the sake of Gundam, though, I watched this series originally on Toonami back when it aired on Cartoon Network back in 2000s or so. And I grew up with those voices for these characters. They are iconic to me. And throughout the entire series, I'm going to say 41 of those episodes, voice acting is great, fantastic, top notch. Here's where I can see where people are going to complain, and I will not disagree with you, is the very first episode. It almost reminds me of Gundam Wing. The very first episode of Gundam, a lot of the voices kind of feel very static, or like they're cardboard box personalities. There's not a whole lot behind them. And I really feel that it was just because it felt like the voice actors were just trying to get into their characters, and not so much so they felt comfortable with them yet. But after the first episode, everyone just took off with their characters. It felt like they were at home with them. So I don't have any complaints about the voice acting, and anybody else who has a complaint about that, well, that's your problem. Aside from that, what really makes this series, like, I feel like what makes this series really solid is the cast. You really care about the crew of White Base, but you also like a lot of the characters that are outside of White Base. We get to see characters on both sides of the war, both Zeon and Federation characters. There are characters that you're also going to hate too, but I think you need those characters that you hate so that it can drive the story furthermore. There are characters that you were like, they're on the opposite side of what your character, like the main characters that we're following with, and like you don't want them to be in that manner or that mode, but unfortunately that's the circumstances. But man, I really like a lot of these characters. There isn't a whole slew of characters I don't like in this series. Like the only one I could really think of as probably Iselina, but that's just because of after Garma's death. Oh, spoilers. By the way, the reviews I give here, they're not going to be non-spoiler-esque, so if you haven't watched it and you don't want spoilers, back off. I apologize, but hey. Aside from that, though, the other things that really drive home with the series is that the theme. Throughout majority of the franchise, the main theme that follows with Gundam and is always consistent with Gundam is that war is terrible. War is hell. War brings the worst of us, and no matter who wins, which side wins, the innocent always lose. So that is something that's always consistent with every single Gundam series there is, period. And I think that the original Gundam does it the best. There is no Gundam series that really like is subpar. Does it? Every Gundam series takes it at a different approach. But I think the original is so streamlined, so basic, and so simplistic. It is by far what drives this war drama very, very well. And some examples I can give you would be like if I talk about Turn A Gundam, where it's more about the human side and how things kind of get with the communicative or weirdness, or you can go to the political theater that's in Gundam Wing, or you can see at points in Gundam 00. Or we can get to a little bit more, not so much the crazy theatrics, but more of the, I would like to put it like the X-Men style storyline that you could see in Z Gundam. But the original Gundam keeps it very simple. There's a lot of things that they put in this way, and then here's some examples I want to give. Like I mentioned in my previous one, I talked about how there was the mother who was trying to go take her son once they landed from the white base. They're refugees, and they're trying to find her hometown, only to find out that the crater that they kind of see a few times in the entire episode happens to be her hometown. That is now a cratered-in lake. You get things like Amon's sorrow for revenge against White Base that leads to Ryu's death. Maharu and her siblings, their awful situation, their life situation as it is, and then what led to her unfortunate death. And of course, the death of Lala, that sparks an unending rivalry between Amuro and Char. And this concept of new types. So I think it's just like there's a lot of things that can be unpackaged from what I just mentioned, but there's a lot of things in there that contain this whole concept of like war is terrible. It has all this, sorrow and hatred that's fueled by loss and tragedy, which then fuels the sorrow and hatred, and it's just this never-ending cycle that doesn't end, and it's nasty, and that's what makes it so entertaining to watch. Not saying it's good, but not good in war sense, but like what makes a story interesting is a conflict that keeps going, and it doesn't seem like there's an end to it. Speaking about never ending too, or like a conflict, I felt like Gundam, the original Gundam, was kind of like it's like the Game of Thrones in my time, at least. For me, I had watched a bunch of animes at the time and a lot of shows and cartoons. And to me, the concept of like a major character dying or anything like that wasn't really there. The original Mobile Suit Gundam was like Game of Thrones to me, where like, again, I've watched shows where characters don't seem like they die or anything like that. So it's like there's never worry. And like the kind of like a moniker at the end of every episode of Gundam was like, who will survive? And it's like, well, no one ever really died. Characters that have died for the first like 20 episodes were like either minor characters, like super minor characters, or like not huge enough. We did get like a major death within the site of Zeon, like Garma's death. I think, if I'm not wrong, episode 13. Correct me if I'm wrong. But when we get further on, we get to episode 20, and then that's the loss of Ryu. And the thing about, I talk about Ryu's death a lot is because throughout the entire 20 episodes, Ryu is a very prominent character. He's very much the morale and support for everybody on White Base. He's given everybody like the hope or like the motivation to keep moving on. So, and even more so, we get in the first like few episodes before his death the whole G armor docking sequences, which is just basically stock footage to eat up time because they were running low on budget. But good lord, does that take forever? But as much as the annoying G docking sequences are and so forth, it really adds more about that screen time with Ryu. And then when he actually sacrifices himself to save the crew from Amon, it really, really hits home. The series does a really amazing job of just keeping everything condensed within, how to put this? The series does a great job of putting Ryu's death in a context of how he impacted everybody on the ship. And it drags on for a couple of episodes, too. Ryu was that first major death. We do get a couple more other, I wouldn't say major, they're more minor deaths, but they still have impacts towards the entire crew and other characters outside of the crew, too. So I thought Gundam was a really, really good mix of that, because I have not seen an anime that kind of done that. Sure, at the time you could throw Dragon Ball Z because, like, you know, Goku dies in the after the 4th episode when Piccolo kills him with Raditz. But hey, that didn't seem too epic. I didn't get to know Goku that long, as well as we got to know Ryu or Matilda, or Ramba Ral too. That being said, the series tends to be very, very human. Kind of going back to the ideas of like what war is, but I thought there was like the smaller details in the series that you don't get a lot in other series that kind of delve either in wartime or with just like sci-fi, unless it's like more modern stuff. Things that kind of stick out to me was that, like, you know, like space noids. So there's a difference between Earth noids and space noids. Obviously, Earth noids are on the Earth and space noids are in space, but most of them are treated like they're not allowed to come down to Earth. You don't really get that idea until there's a couple of things that indicate this. Like, there was a scene in I forget which episode at this point, but when they were landing into I think it was the Atlantic, and they're being chased by Rumble Rawl's unit. Fraubo and the kids were being freaked out by the thunder and lightning in the clouds. Same thing with the Zeon soldiers that were chasing them. They were like, "Oh my god, what is this? Is this a new Federation secret weapon? Oh my god, is this a new Zeon weapon?" And they were being kind of calmed down by their, well, Frau didn't get calmed down, but the Zeon soldiers were being calmed down by Ramba, saying like, "No, this is a natural occurrence on Earth. You guys don't get to see this, right?" And it's kind of like startling when you hear stuff like that. It's like the little bit of a differential things, that little bit of a human touch to it, and like it makes it a little bit more realistic and interesting. There's a few more other things that do pop up in the series, but I just want to keep it short, just keep it right there. So another thing that was great about the original series is that it had a good balance. Just like a lot of shows, there's a good balance between storytelling and then the action. I felt like the original series blended very well, having that wartime drama stuff alongside with the mecha fights. And the mecha fights are not boring by any means. Even though it's an old animation, it's 1979, it is not by any means boring. A lot of the action sequences are fun to watch, a bit cheesy at times, and, you know, sometimes a little bit inconsistent. Some of the, like, you know, like the machine gun fires, or like when the Gundam's firing the beam rifle, it kind of feels like you're watching G.I. Joe at times with the lasers and stuff like that flying around across the screen. So it kind of got hokey for me at times, but a lot of it wasn't that bad. It's just very, very entertaining. Other than that, there's a lot of awesome like episodes or sequences. Even there's like filler episodes that are great. Some that come to my mind right now is the Salt episode. Everybody who's ever watched Gundam or is a huge fan of Gundam like myself either loves or hates the Salt episode, because, you know, salt is a very important mineral for your body. You need it. I just laugh at it. It makes me think of the idiocracies, like electrolytes are good for your body. You know, it's what plants crave. But actually, it was a actually relevant episode because it deals with Sayla stealing the Gundam. But, you know, White Base was running out of salt, and they kept talking about it throughout the entire episode. I thought that was great. That said, other scenes that I really did like, or episodes I liked too. I had to mention the salt one because everyone gives that one so much. And I'm like, I love it. I love it for its corniness, its PSA moments, and then, you know, it was a relevant episode. It wasn't just filler, but there were filler moments in there. Other parts I loved in the entire series, I really did enjoy. I had to pull up my little list right here. Char's betrayal and Garma's death. That was an awesome, like, you kind of get an idea in a previous episode or so when like Char was trying to like betray Garma, but then the real betrayal and that led to Garma's death was, whoa, mind blowing. That was a nice little twist right there. Rumble Roll's assault in episode, I want to say, I believe it was 20 actually. Let me think. I can't remember, but Rumble Roll's assault was actually a really, really awesome one because it was just the whole build up of, hey, White Base could actually get us like stopped by not by mobile suits, but by normal soldiers, experienced soldiers versus an inexperienced crew. And then of course when Rumble Roll had passed away, not passed away, but went out with a bang. Char's Zagok's appearance in Jaburo, when it pumps up a freaking GM, and then as it explodes, it just comes up very menacingly, and it's like, oh, Sha, and it's like, oh, there you are, Gundam. And I was like, dang, that was an intense scene. And then what else do we have here? Oh, the entire episode of Cosmic Glow, which is deals with the buildup and the eventual death of Lala. Wow, that was a crazy, interesting episode. I'll talk a little bit more about that too. And of course, I cannot end this off without talking about one of the most amazing scenes. Oh wait, well, one more amazing scene, which is the Gundam's last shooting, one of the most famous scenes in the entire Gundam franchise. Of the Gundam, shooting straight into the sky, or shooting straight to hit the Zeong's head. And of course, speaking of headshots, I can't not talk about Char's amazing headshot with a bazooka on Casilla Zavi. Not only headshotting her, but literally taking out the Zanzibar ship that she was in. That was... Oh, and it's got a very nice little titling behind it too. A boom headshot. Try not to spoil too much of that, but here you go. Boom headshot! Char taking out Casilla. One shot with a bazooka, headshot, and destroys her entire Zanzibar class ship, which is actually a pretty large Zeon-based ship. Continuing on too, so there is the argument, well, not the argument, but like, because the series was getting canceled and it got shortened down from 52 episodes to 43 episodes, the pacing of the series was great up until like the last like 5 episodes or so, I want to say. And they kind of like, it feels like it was ham-fisted this concept of new types. Throughout the entire series, they kind of mention about it. They don't really mention, they kind of like allude to like psychics or precog, but they don't really talk about new types until like the last, not even quite 10 episodes. And that's because, of course, budget was going to be cut off and they're running low and they're going to get canceled. So they had to rush through the entire series. So when they brought in the whole concept of new types, it altered the entire dialogue, the entire pacing of the remainder of the series, and it went into another direction. It went really, really wonky. And it's a direction that kind of set forth with all other Gundam series, except with a couple, I believe, because, no, not a couple, a few of them that don't deal with, UC Century or new types. But it sets a very interesting precedence. And in particular, I'm going to talk about episode 41, Cosmic Glow. As I mentioned earlier, episode 41, Cosmic Glow, deals with Char, Amuro, and Sayla and Lala fighting and the eventual lead up to Lala's death. Oh, poor Nero. My cat's here. He's freaking out. Well, the Thunder and Lightning's freaking out, so he's now here on my lap. Don't worry, buddy. What, you never been to Earth before? You never experienced thunder and lightning? Huh, it's a natural occurrence. Man, my rumble roll is terrible. But, so they bring in the concept about new types, and it's very rushed. If you don't know what a new type is, it's basically, I'm going to try and keep this short. It's basically humans that have evolved to have precognition, either kind of like a super sense or being able to read each other's emotions, not mind, but read each other's emotions. It was supposed to be the next stage of human evolution, so we have a better way of communicating. And it's kind of alluding right back to the whole war is terrible, but why does war happen? And it's miscommunication. And we kind of see that throughout the entire series, and that there was hopes that being people evolving into new types would avoid war, avoid conflict. And that's where we kind of get into the ideology behind new types and what the series kind of touches on. And it's more elaborated towards other series or talk more. But the concept of new types with nature versus nurture. When you watch the first episode where Lala appears and Amuro and her meet, they have this fateful encounter. But it didn't make much sense why Amuro has this connection with her and communication with her, that even though Char, who spends majority of his time with her, doesn't make any sense. And it becomes this argument about nature versus nurture, where Amuro and Lala are more in tune new types to each other, whereas Char isn't. Amuro and Lala's relationship being kind of like that nature new type, where they naturally are linked with each other. They're able to read each other's emotions, thoughts, their processes, and basically transcending time and time and space, essentially. And that's what you see in that episode. It gets really trippy. I'll talk about that in a moment. Versus Char and Lala's relationship as new types, because she was more of like a mother figure to him and nurtured him as a new type. So you kind of got this like little bit of a difference, and then you get the clash, this clashing argument, this unending rivalry between these two, not only because of Lala's death, but also the concept of new types, this whole nature versus nurture. Which is better, which is more prevalent, which is more dangerous. Those sort of things is addressed. Unfortunately, they do this in the span of 3 episodes, so it makes it super wonky and cattywampus, and it doesn't help out that episode 41 is like an acid trip. Past halfway through the entire episode, you get treated to Lala melting into the screen and just stars and like flare effects and stuff like that. It's like, it just gets trippy. This is something that gets brought along towards other Gundam series when they deal with new types, but a lot less trippier, I would say, and a little bit more coherent. We'll actually see a little more coherency about new types when we talk about the trilogy. Aside from that, one thing I want to introduce here is that if you are new to Gundam, should you start with this first? This is actually a question about the Gundam franchise overall, and I will address this with every single show, movie, and OVA I address, because a lot of people ask the question like, hey, I've heard about Gundam. It's an awesome series from what I heard, but I don't know where to start. There's 30 series and movies and OVAs. Where do I begin? Or I've watched only like one series of Gundam, but I don't know how the others are, and I don't want to like mix and match or get lost in the continuity of things. And I'm like, okay, so I'm going to start it fresh here with this. The original Gundam series, I'm going to say it's a yes and a no. And it's a polarized response, but I'm going to give you an actual solid one in a little bit. This is the series that started off Gundam, okay? And it's what got the franchise going for a very good reason. It's a very solid series and very thorough. It stood the test of time and even cancellation. 40 years later, and it's still going strong. This is a series that, even though it's dated in animation and some ideologies and some thoughts, it's still a very enjoyable series to watch, and still presents a lot of themes that carry over 40 years later. I keep bringing that up, but it's amazing. So the only thing that's really going to be that yes and no is purely on taste. And this is where that yes and no comes into play. I'm going to say yes, start on the original Gundam. Because it, again, is the basis of all Gundam series. It's a solid watch. It's a great real robot mecha that gives you a lot of likable characters that you can grow with, basically. There's a lot of character development within this war drama. And yes, especially if you're starting in the UC Century timeline, this is the best starting place because everything starts off because of this war. So this is something I would recommend starting off if you're going in the UC Century and you don't have a problem with like dated animation or anything like that. I'm going to say no. If you're, you don't know, you're one of those viewers or anime fans that are really, really picky about watching older animation. You want something that's more outrageous and crazy mecha action like Gurren Lagann, or like, I would even put it to levels like a Mechazener, that kind of stuff. I would put it like that. Or you just plain don't like war drama or character development stories. Like you just want action-based stories and stuff like that. Not like these overspanning arcs that deal with character development and, of course, you know, robots. So that's where it's going to come into that yes or no. Do you want this? Do you want this not? But my opinion, as a Gundam fan, and I'm a UC elitist, I will admit this, but I would say the original Mobile Suit Gundam is a great starting point. This is something you should really jump onto. And if you really want to get into the Gundam franchise, this is a good starting point. You don't have a lot to go back onto. You don't have a lot to go back from. It's a great starting point. So overall, the original Gundam, solid, fantastic, great characters, great mech designs, albeit some are hokey. Great fighting, amazing war drama, something that survived cancellation and the test of time 40 years later. An amazing series. Again, like I mentioned before too, I'll get to that one as well. As I mentioned too, like, this is a series I was very polarized with when it comes to my reviews or like how I rate it, because it's depending on my mood. Sometimes I come into watching Gundam, or the original Gundam, I'm like, this is a 4 out of 5. It's a great one, but I still find some like little kinks or little things that are like I didn't really enjoy about it. And then sometimes I've watched it, I go like, this is amazing, this is a masterpiece, 5 out of 5, best record. Oh, there's Nero. So it all varies on how I feel, or how I go about it. At this current point in time, a week later after I've done my initial review, and I had time to review my notes and recap on a lot of things, I think I'm going to still stand by on how I reviewed the original Gundam here. And I'm going to say that Mobile Suit Gundam gets a 4 out of 5. Solid 4 out of 5. I might want to give it a 5, but at the moment here, I think the only thing that kind of dock it for me was just some of the filler stuff, the pacing towards the end. Some things kind of feel too ham-fisted, but other than that, I mean, it's a solid series. I can't argue